I met Sir Richard Branson about 6 months ago, and he taught me something about making better decisions that I will never forget. When he started Virgin Atlantic, he didn't just buy a plane. Now, everyone was telling him, you are going to fail. You're crazy. You are a music business record executive going and starting an airline. You are going to fail. And what he did, genius, is he said, I'm not going to go buy the plane. He said, I'm not going to go pay all these massive 10-year leases for airports and everything else. Instead, I'm going to lease the plane for 1 year. I'm going to make all the airport deals for 1 year. And I know that even if everything goes terribly wrong, I am sorted and I can cover everything for 1 year. And that single move protected him from all the downside risk and gave him the shot to get all the upside benefit, which is exactly what happened. And that is exactly how founders should think. And that is exactly what I've incorporated as aggressively as I can into my own life in the last 6 months. Now, from what he taught me, I've taken 3 main points that I want to talk about and convey to you in the video today. First of which is every decision has 2 sides to it. It has the upside and the downside. Tim, that's obvious. Yeah, I know. But there's some very important realizations that we can build off the back of that. Because good founders and good entrepreneurs are going to look at both sides and say, well, what's going to happen both directly, first order consequences, but also what might that otherwise cause. So for example, let's just say that in company A, there's an entrepreneur who's saying, I need to change something about my company. And they're considering to completely pivot, change it completely, what the company does. That is probably, to use some words that Jeff Bezos likes to use, is probably a door that once opened, he probably can't close it. Because if this founder and this entrepreneur is going to have to go to all their customers, all their users, etc., and say, we're changing the business, we're no longer going to be able to support you in 3 months' time, we're changing to this, we hope you stay with us during this transition, that's going to cause a lot of harm to his business. Because suddenly, everyone who was just happy with his business is now reviewing and saying, do I want to deal with this risk and many other things? And so he might lose a very large portion of his business that if his pivot doesn't work, it's to be catastrophic. And so you need to be thinking about what comes next. Is this going to open lots of doors? Is it going to close a lot of doors? And what might actually happen if it works out and if it doesn't work out. Because, for example, if you are making bets with your business over time, and if you're constantly betting everything, going all in, eventually you're going to strike out and lose. And that's the way that you're going to be off the table forever. And professional gamblers, they actually know the aim isn't to go all in and win this big, crazy amount of money. It's just to keep playing the game with a very small edge, and that's going to compound over time and result in a lot of winnings. And you can kind of take that into the second point, which is you don't want to be betting really big. Ideally, you want to be making lots of very small bets very quickly and learning fast. Just like a professional poker player, they're making smaller bets and they're just trying to win most of the time, and that's going to result in compounding growth. And that's exactly what you want to do as a founder from my own experience. And what I've been doing is saying, okay, instead of going and making this really big decision, investing 50,000 in something or having to pursue something for several months, is there something very small that I can do that either allows me to de-risk what it is that I'm doing, or say, am I going to get a lot more information and clarity about what that path ends up looking like down the line? So for example, I have recently engaged with an agency to help my company grow. And what I'm going to do is, or before I did that, I went and I spoke to several of their clients, which took me about 90 minutes in total to reach out, have those conversations, make sure that they're telling the truth. And that gave me a lot more confidence and certainty in that path forwards. And so now I feel much more comfortable making a tens of thousands of dollar bet because I've done a little bit more research, I've been more clarity, and I've heard both good things and bad things about the path. But for example, I've also budgeted in our company that we're going to make this as a 3-month bet, because that also limits our downside risk of what if it doesn't work out, etc. And so we're very cognitive, my partner and I, about what it is that we're trying to do and the pros and the cons. And there's many things that are still unknowable, and it's somewhat a speculative bet, but we have limited the downside. And so we're very comfortable betting about $10,000, a little bit over, because we think if it works, it's going to be worth a lot of money. And if it doesn't work, $10,000. But that feels like a really good decision for us, because we've thought about it and we're measuring it, and we feel very comfortable that, for example, it's not going to kill the business from making a small bet like that. Which leads very naturally into the third point, which is exactly as Branson did in the story I told you. How do we limit our downside risk while hopefully aiming for as much upside risk or upside potential as possible? I think people always think about the upside a lot, and they underestimate often what the downside risk could be. Because, for example, let's just say you go for some big marketing campaign that you're like, oh man, like I think this is going to be super successful. It's going to blow up our awareness. It's going to blow up the business in a really good way. But maybe you're trying to play a slightly controversial angle that could actually also result in a lot of maybe like social outrage. And that could be something that could end up being very detrimental to your business. But maybe you're not thinking about that because the exciting potential future is a lot more attention grabbing than the potential downside risk. And so this is kind of like the 3-point checklist that I've been thinking through, which is what are the upsides and the downsides? And are there going to be any kind of things that are undoable from this if it doesn't work out? Second, what is the smallest, fastest bet that I can make to test this before making the full decision? And third, how can I minimize the downside risk while potentially increasing the upside risk or upside potential, to look at, is this going to be something that's really worth the bet? And while making sure from number one, that it's not going to be something that kills us, because you really don't want to do irreparable harm to your company. That would be a terrible, terrible thing. And, I hear a lot of founders and a lot of entrepreneurs, including my own friends and myself in the past, say, I feel really good about this decision, and they're making decisions on feelings, which I think is okay. And I think that should be a factor. But I treat this very much as a checklist for any time that we're making any decision of substance, because we want to avoid doing something or almost blundering into a mistake that we didn't consider fully. And so I use this literally very simple 3-point checklist to make sure, is what we're trying to do going to be a good decision? And are we doing the steps to make a good decision? Because if you're making good decisions, even if the decision doesn't work out in your favor, I think that's the right way to make decisions as an entrepreneur.